I'm just set up here because I can barely hear myself. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope. And we'll get started here. This is going to be untracked astrophotography. Terry asked me to do this for the Western Wisconsin Photo Club, and I'm sure there's others from around the area on this as well. But let's get started here. Okay. Oop. Okay. We're going to go through a number of different things tonight. And this is the brief list of what we're going to be covering. First of all, what is untracked astrophotography? We'll talk briefly about equipment, planning, photographing, stacking, any post-processing that you'd like to do. I'll briefly show you a gallery of some of the shots that I've taken. We'll talk about some other things you can stack as well. Then we'll demo some software, and we can do question and answer. There is a question and answer or a chat area that Terry's watching. I don't see that here, but be sure and ask your questions. We'll talk about whatever you'd like to talk about, and hopefully we'll cover all the major things that we need to know.
The chat should be at the lower part of your screen, way on at the very bottom on the right.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, first of all, what is untracked astrophotography? This is, for me anyway, it's photographing deep sky objects, and those are things usually outside of our own galaxy. So we've got our solar system with the sun and the 8 or 9 planets, depending on your count. And then outside of that, we've got all the stars that you can see with the naked eye. All of that is within our own galaxy. Deep sky objects are, generally speaking, is outside of that. The other thing you do is you have to shoot lots of frames. We'll talk about that in a lot more detail, but we need to capture as much light as possible. We're going to have a short exposure time to eliminate star trailing, high ISO to capture as much light as we can. And again, we'll talk about these things in more detail. The big part of this is going to be the stacking. We're going to stack the frames to increase the amount of light that the final result will have. And the stack that we're going to do includes light frames, dark frames, flat, dark flat, and offset and bias. And this is where some people get confused, but we're going to talk about each of these again. And then also the post-processing. This is what really brings out the details in what you're doing. We'll talk about equipment. This, right off the bat, I'd say, use what you have, and that'll determine also what you can shoot. So if you've got a long lens, you may be able to get some things that are farther away and not as bright. If you've got a wide angle lens, you can do the Milky Way and some of those things. So use what you have. Start there anyway, and then that'll tell you what else you may need down the line. For all the pictures you'll see tonight, I'm using my camera, which is a Canon 7D Mark II. It's a 1.6 crop factor. And the lens I use is a Canon 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8. Be sure you have a tripod so you eliminate the motion in your pictures, the blur. Intervalometer, those can be internal to the camera, they can be external, or you can use something called Magic Lantern, which is a third-party software that runs on The Canon cameras, I'm not sure about the other makes, but Magic Lantern is an option if you've got Canon. Extra battery. If you're going to be out at night, you're taking lots of pictures, make sure you've got an extra battery, and also if it's cold, you can keep it in your pocket, keep it warm. You may also need extra memory cards, the SanDisk, compact flash, the whatever type of memory card your camera uses. Another thing is chemical hand warmers. To keep my lens warm and to keep it from either fogging up during the summer or getting the frost in the winter, I put some chemical hand warmers in an old sock, lay that over the top of the lens, and that usually works for most of the night. And like I say, that works for either the frost or the dew in the summer. Be ready for the bugs. Long pants, long sleeves. I have a thermocell. Those work really well. It's a chemical device that runs off of, I believe it's butane, but it makes a smell that keeps the bugs away. Or you can just use regular bug spray. Dress warm. Boots, hats, coats. I usually try and dress for about 20 degrees colder than what the lowest temperature is going to be. And that's just because if you're going to be out 2 or 3 hours, after a while it's going to get cold. Even if it's only 60 degrees, after a few hours, it's going to get cold. Flashlight with a red light. If you're using a white light, it can interfere with your night vision. A red light works much better for that. And one final thing here is be able to operate your camera, your lens, your intervalometer, all of your equipment in the dark, because it's going to be dark when you're taking these pictures. It's not as important if you're by yourself, because then you can turn a light on or something and check it out. But if you're with a group, make sure you can do all these things in the dark. Then we're going to talk about planning. We need to know about the weather. We need to know about the position of the moon because we need a dark sky. We need to know which deep sky object or DSO is going to make the best target for tonight. And then we need to be able to find that DSO in the sky. So first we'll talk about planning for the weather. I have 2 apps on my phone. I've got an Android phone. I don't know if these are both available on iPhone, but I assume they are. The first one is Clear Outside. Clear Outside I've been using for a while and does a really good job. It gives you the, if we look, gives you the date, gives you the sunrise, sunset, tells you when the moon is going to come up, go down, gives you the hour of the day in 24 hours. It gives you the indication of the sunlight, and then the golden hour, the blue hour, and the twilight, and then when it's dark or night. And then it goes the same way as the sun is coming back up again. It does the same thing with the moon. It tells you when the moon is going to be down, and the gray is when the moon is going to rise. So up here it says 12:30, the moon is going to rise, and it shows you that right here. It also gives you the cloud cover. The low, medium, and high, I really don't take that into account much. All I look for is the total cloud cover, because if you have any clouds, you're going to have a problem. So you want to look for the zeros across the top. Then it gets into some more things that you may want to look at. Visibility and fog. If the humidity is high, you may still have problems photographing because you need a clear sky, you need low humidity. Down here, chance of rain, amount of rain, wind direction, that kind of thing. Wind direction, I don't look at the direction much, it's more the speed. If you have a lot of wind, it's going to move your camera, move your tripod, and it's going to give you trouble photographing. And then the temperature, which is nice to know, it's in centigrade. I haven't been able to find a way to change it to Fahrenheit, but it'll give you the temperature in centigrade. And this is good too, because you know then how to plan for, is it going to frost? Is it, we're going to have dew? How should I dress for the weather? That kind of thing. I like to double check what I find against astrophotography. This is interesting. I just found this recently, but this also, up here in the corner, you can push play. It'll show you the cloud cover. So it actually shows you a representation of the clouds in your area, which is interesting to see, and you can tell when it's going to be clear, when it's going to be cloudy. It's a nice backup tool that I use. And again, down here, the first line is the cloud cover. So you want to get the blue is no clouds, and that'll match up against the video on top. The other things are as the sun is setting, the moon is rising, direction of wind again, temperature, humidity, that kind of thing. Depends what all you're looking for, but two good apps that'll give you a lot of information. I should say Clear Outside will give you a week in advance. Astrospheric will give you about 48 hours in advance. So if you're planning for several days out, try Clear Outside. If you're checking for tonight's sky, you can double check it with Astrospheric, or if you've got other apps or weather things on your PC that you use, compare them all. It's good to have a good understanding of what it's going to be like. This is just a close-up view of Clear Outside. Again, it gives you sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset, tells you how much moon there's going to be, and it goes through the phases of the sunlight. I usually try and plan mine when it's the darkest outside. If you have a lot of moon, you're going to have interference from just being too bright outside. And same thing with the moon. This will tell you the moon is up until, in this case, at 12:30 it's going to set. So right here, 12:30 it's going to set. And again, the total cloud cover going to be a little cloudy during the evening, but after midnight, it's going to drop off. And you can go out and tell. 1, 2, 3% isn't bad, but the best way is probably last minute, but you can just go outside and look up. There are lots of places on the internet you can find moon phases, and this is really important when doing astrophotography. You want to make sure you've got a dark sky. So something like this is for June of this year. The best nights to photograph, you have no moon all night, or at least for the period of time that you're photographing. I've found that the best nights are also 2 to 3 days after a full moon through about 2 to 3 days after a new moon. And that way the moon has set before night, or when it's really dark, or moonrise is after that. So it's just so that you have no moon interfering with your photography. And this just talks about what we just saw in the last one. Night starts about 2 hours after sunset and ends about 2 hours before sunrise. So you can work through that. The other thing is that as the sun is going down, you can start getting set up so that you're ready to go when it gets dark. Okay, selecting a deep sky object. You can do word of mouth, you can look on the internet. Some of the things that I use is the Messier list of objects. Charles Messier was in the 1600s. And so what you'll find with his list is that these are the biggest and the brightest objects, because working with the equipment that he had during the 1600s, the things that he could see were the big ones and the bright ones. So this is usually the list that I go to. There's other lists, the New General Catalog or NGC. There's almost 8,000 of those. Barnard objects, if you're looking at for nebulas, that can be of help. Caldwell is just a complement to the Messier list. The HR list shows stars by temperature and color, which is very interesting to see as well, because as a star changes temperature, it also changes color. So you get stars of all different colors. And just one example, for example, the Andromeda Galaxy. In the Messier catalog, it's M31. It's also NGC 224. So you'll see things in multiple lists, but it's all the same thing. You'll just see them listed with their own numbers in whatever list you're looking at. Okay, how do you find something that you're looking for? Two of the best things that I've found, one is an app for my phone and one is a PC download, and they're both very good and they're both free. So that helps as well. Sky Safari is a phone app. You can zoom in, you can zoom out, you can do a search, you can check your settings, you can do time forward and backward in time. So you can, okay, what's it gonna be like at 10 o'clock tomorrow night? You can go through some of those things. You can do the same thing with Stellarium, and we'll do a demo of Stellarium in a little bit. But Stellarium is the same thing. You can get on a big screen on your computer. Like it shows down here, you can set date and time. We'll show you that in a little bit. But two very good apps for finding something that you want as a target for tonight. And both of them have a search feature. So if you find something, put it in the search, it'll take you right to it. How do I know what's going to be out tonight? Sky Safari is very good with that. If you want to know what you can see tonight, go into Sky Safari, do the search, which is right down here at the bottom. Click on search, and then click on tonight's best. When you do that, it'll bring up a list, usually about 40 to 50 DSO that are going to be out in the sky tonight. And so you can just scroll through the list, pick something that you want to see. If you click on something, it'll give you more detail about that object, and you can go from there. How do you know if what you're going to photograph is bright enough to see with your photography? Sky Safari does a good job with that as well. If you click on an object, it'll give you the information for that object. One of the things you want to look at is the magnitude. This is Bode's Nebula or Bode's Galaxy, Messier Object 81, NGC 3031. Has a visual magnitude of 6.77. That is just slightly beyond what is visible to the naked eye, but with your camera, you should be able to get a good shot of that. If you have a very dark sky, very dark location, you can usually see visual magnitudes of up to +6. And the larger the number, the less bright it is. So you want to get the real small pluses, preferably the negative numbers. Those are the brightest ones. You also want to look at the size. This is the apparent size. When you go out and look around, there's 360 degrees all around the Earth. Each degree is broken into 60 minutes, and each minute is broken into 60 seconds. So 21 arc minutes by 11 arc minutes is just slightly smaller than the moon. And down here, the moon is 31 arc minutes. So it's a pretty good sized target. And this is as well from a dark location with a dark sky. And again, with your photography, you can bring out some of that detail. We missed Polaris. Polaris, the North Star, is magnitude about +2. So it just gives you relative to some of the other things. Magnitude, small is good. Apparent size, bigger is better. Photographing your deep sky object. We're going to talk about camera settings, focusing in the dark, locking the stars, and then calibration frames, light, dark, flat, and the others. We'll talk about each of those in detail. This is something that gets a little confusing for some, but once you play with it a little bit, it gets much better to handle. So we'll talk about each of these coming up. Camera settings. Set the shooting mode to manual because we want to adjust each thing on the camera ourselves. We want to use a high ISO that allows us to capture as much light as possible. Short exposure time. We do this to eliminate star trailing. One of the things you'll find with Deep Sky Stacker is that it needs circular stars. So if you have exposure time too long, your stars will get long, and Deep Sky Stacker will reject those. So just watch for that. Low f-stop. We want to do that so that we can capture as much light as possible. Also, excuse me just a minute. Okay, turn off your autofocus. Autofocus doesn't work in the dark, and we want to use manual focus anyway to get the best, clearest shot we can. We want to use live view. On Canon, it's called live view. And what that does is give you really a live view of what is being seen through your camera and through your lens. And we use live view to focus. I'll give you a better shot of that in just a minute. Tripod and intervalometer. You want to use those to limit the vibration in your camera and in your tripod. Sturdy tripod, camera on top, a long lens is going to be subject to vibration. So with an intervalometer, whether it's a wired remote or a wireless remote, you can click that without affecting your camera and tripod. And again, be able to operate your camera in the dark. Know where the buttons are, know how to change your ISO, your aperture, all your settings in the dark. Something that I've used for my shooting is that we're going to take a lot of shots here. So you want to get everything set up, shoot, in my case, I shoot 100 frames using my intervalometer. When that's done, I refocus, I recenter my target in the frame, and then I start through again, another 100 frames. We do the refocus because as it gets warmer or colder, you get the expansion and contraction within your lens, and that can cause the focus to go off. You want to center your target because you're not tracking. This is untracked. Your target is going to wander across your field of view. So when you've got a moment, you want to recenter that, get everything back to the center. And then you just keep going for as long as you can go until the sun comes up or the clouds move in or it gets too cold, whatever. Keep going as long as you can. And the last one is, in a minute, I'll show you this, but I wanted to mention it here so that we've got it. Within Deep Sky Stacker, we can determine a custom rectangle where your target is, which means that your target needs to stay in the center of the frame. It'll make more sense later when we talk about it, but make sure that your target stays near the center of the frame. Focusing in the dark. As we mentioned,
Before you go on, Bryan,
yes.
on that back slide, I'm wondering if you're going to give us an idea of what your settings are going to be using your Canon 200 millimeter lens. I'm wondering if you're going to share your settings, and also I was wondering. What is the minimum number that you want to be able to shoot in order to get good results?
Okay, good. Yes, I will be talking about the settings and show you some pictures taken with those settings so that we can talk about that. And the minimum number. I usually go out and stay out until I get cold. Or during the summer until the dew just gets so bad that it's not worth staying out. But for me, 1,000, 2,000 frames, it depends how long you want to stay out. And each time that you go out, you can take more frames. And what Deep Sky Stacker does, it allows you to stack for multiple nights. And we can talk about that in a little bit too. So if I go out tonight and for some reason, let's say the clouds roll in after an hour, I can go ahead and stack what I've got and see how that looks. Tomorrow night, if I go out and shoot the same target, I can add that night with the previous night and combine them all together into one picture, which is a really nice feature with Deep Sky Stacker, as long as your settings are the same on both nights. So both at 200 millimeters, both nights at the same shutter speed and all of that. So you just have to be aware of some of those things. Focusing in the dark. There's a lot of discussion about this on the internet, and a lot of people do it in a lot of different ways. One way you can do it is go out during the day and focus on something that's a long ways away, like a water tower. Or if it's starting to get dark, use a street light that's a long ways away. Because at night, your autofocus is not going to work. So just turn it off and manually focus. Know where infinity is on your camera. That's a good starting point. It's not always a good place to keep it because, like I say, if your lens gets warm or gets cold during the night, you may need to adjust your focus a little bit. Sometimes people will tell you go out during the day, focus on something a long ways away, and then put a piece of tape on your focus so that it stays there. You know where it is at night. The one problem with that is, like I say, if it gets hot or cold or the temperature changes while you're out, you may need to adjust that just a little bit. The best way that I've found to do it is go into live view. And again, that's a Canon term. But go into live view, adjust your focus until you get the pinpoint stars. On the left, you've got one that's out of focus. On the right, it's one that they're just pinpoint stars. And that's what you want. That's when they're in focus. So I'll manually adjust until the stars are pinpoint. And as we talked about, adjust throughout the night because there's a chance that it may change due to temperature. And sometimes I've found too that if you're pointing your camera straight up or nearly straight up at night, you can get lens creep, which is just the weight of the lens turning the focus of your camera. And depending on your lens and what you use, you may get more or less of that. I've had one of my zoom lenses, if you point it straight up, it'll just automatically come right back down, which is not good if you're using that for astrophotography. So just some things to keep in mind there. Once you're out there, you've got a target. How do I find it? One way that I've found, I just call it walking the stars. This one here, this is a shot from Stellarium, just a screenshot. Merak is the corner star in the Big Dipper. So find that and then walk that to the next one and then walk that to your first target and your second target. So find something that you know is there, something that's easy to find, and then just walk your stars from one to the next. The one on the right, this is an actual picture taken one night while I was outside. So when you take a picture of the sky at night, there's no lines on it like you see on your phone or on your PC. You've got to find your own things. So here's Merak, very bright. Walk that to the next one. And this is your first target and your second target. And interesting here, this is the first live picture that we've seen. This may be what you're going to see. And this, I think, is a really good picture of something that's not very bright and is really small. So if this is what you get, be happy about that because you can see it. And it's there. You know you've got it in frame. You've started with your bright star and you've walked from there. Being able to see what you're looking for really helps. It's not always the case. Sometimes you may see the bright star, but you may not see these other things until you stack it, which is really interesting when you're spending hours outside taking pictures of things you can't see. But just try walking the stars. Now this is the full shot of the previous one we just looked at. So this is M97, which is this one right here. That's the Owl Nebula. Over here, I'm sorry, Owl Nebula is this one over here. M108 is a galaxy. It's over here. And this was shot at f2.8, 1.6 seconds, ISO 16,000 at 200 millimeters on a 1.6 crop camera. So you have to keep all those things into account. And f2.8 to make sure we can get as much light as possible. 1.6 because I don't want the trailing of the stars. I want pinpoint stars. 16,000 is just a number that I picked. You want a high ISO, you may not want to go that high because you can see in this image, there's a lot of noise here that comes along with the high ISO. 200 millimeters plus the 1.6 crop factor. So again, you've got your initial star right here. You walk over to your second star, go to your first target and your second target. And again, you're outside at night. This is what you're going to see. So make sure you've got a reference star. And usually what I do, since these aren't very bright here, take this bright star and try and keep it right here on the display of your camera. What you'll notice is that as you start taking pictures, if you take 100, it'll start moving, in this case, across the display. When it comes time to refocus and recenter, bring this back over here, and then you'll know that these guys are right in the middle of your frame. Calibration frames. This is where a lot of misunderstanding, or I just don't understand what's going on, comes into effect. These are all important, and you should do all of these, whether you want to or not, and we'll see some examples of these as well. Light frames. These are the pictures you're taking. This is a light frame. So this is the actual picture that you're taking. This is done with whatever camera settings you want to take the best picture you can. And I showed you the settings that I use. Your camera, your lens may require some different settings, and that's fine. Use the settings that you need to take the best picture that you can. Dark frames. When you're done shooting your light frames, all you have to do is put the lens cap on your camera and take your dark frames. I recommend at least 50, and that's, for me, that's just a good number. We'll talk about what the light frames or the dark frames do in just a minute, but this is, take about 50. The one issue with this is that it's going to take the amount of time it takes to take another 50 frames. So just do it. You need to take your dark frames. And the important thing about this, take them at the same time as you take your light frames. As soon as you're done, do this, because they need to be done at the same time, mostly because you want the same temperature and you want the same camera settings as your light frames. So same temperature. Temperature affects your sensor, and the sensor is what we're trying to correct by doing all these calibration frames. So make sure it's done at the same time to do the same temperature and at the same settings. Because again, we're doing these things to correct what was done in your light frames. With the light frames, we talked about the high ISO creates noise. Temperature creates noise. On the light frames, you've got hot pixels, dead pixels, dark pixels. Dark frames will help with that. Now, along with that, we want to do offset and bias. And again, we need to do this at the same time as you took your light frames. So take your light frames, put on the lens cap, take your dark frames, and then the only change you make is set your shutter speed to the fastest that your camera allows, whether it's 1/4000th, 1/8000th, whatever it is, set it to that and take 50 more. What the offset bias does is it deals with the noise of the high ISO and the temperature of your sensor. And what you've got here is, generically speaking, it's 1 over the square root of the offset bias of your frames, or the number of offset bias frames that you take. And for example, if you take 49 offset frames, the resulting noise in your stack will be 1/7 of what you started with. So you can greatly reduce the noise in your final picture by taking your offset frame. And it's easy to do. Take your light frames, put on your lens cap, take your dark frames, change your shutter speed, take your bias frames or your offset frames. It's easy to do. Just make sure you do it. And there'll be some examples coming up of why you want to do that. Flat frames and dark frames is something that I didn't do for a long time, but something that you really need to do to get the best picture quality that you can get. And we'll have examples of this too. It's kind of funny how it works, how it looks, but you need to do this too. These are done totally different. These are exposures of a light source when the lens is covered by a cloth, a piece of cloth, like an old t-shirt or something like that. But the ISO must match the light frames. And again, take 50 dark and 50 flat, or whatever number you feel does the best job for you. Now, the difference of these is that we're not worried about the temperature or the sensor, that kind of thing. We just want these as calibration frames. So what I did to take mine is I got a blank white screen on my computer monitor, and then you just photograph that 50 times. The thing about this is that the ISO must match the settings of your light frames, or of, in this case, of all the other frames. ISO is going to be the same for all of these. And we'll take a look at what this does in just a minute. But this is what you need, and you really want to do each of those. You can go without it and try just stacking your light frames, but I think the best result is to do all of these. Dark frames. What does dark frame do? This is used to remove the hot pixels, dead pixels, stuck pixels, and basically anything that's not dark. So this is an enlargement of a light frame. I've got a pixel up here and a pixel down here that are not stars. In this case, they're red. They could be blue, they could be green, or they could just be, I've seen some on mine, it's just a white square. You want to get rid of those, and the way you do it is by including dark frames. So up here you've got the same thing in the same place as these two, and dark frame will eliminate that from your final stacked picture. Offset bias. Offset bias, again, works with the noise coming from your sensor. So in this case, there is something here that remains that it will take care of. But in the most part, it's looking at each pixel on your light frame, and it's dealing with the noise in here. You can see a lot of noise in here. The blues, the greens, and the reds all throughout here. And stacking that with offset frames will take care of that. Take care of a lot of it, depending on how many you take. Okay, flat frames and dark frames. These are the ones you take anytime you want to. You just need to take care of that. And it's used to remove dust spots from your sensor or your lens vignetting. So all of these here are dust spots on the sensor, and those could be removed by taking flat frames. They can also be removed by taking, again with the flat frames, it will remove lens vignette. And you might be able to tell in this picture, the center is light, but as you get out to the corners, it gets to be a little bit dark. And what happens is that when you stack a bunch of these on top of each other, the center gets lighter, the edges get darker, and it can really mess with your final image. Like this one. Do I need to take dark frames and dark flat frames? Yeah, you do. This is Bode's Nebula, Bode's Galaxy, and the Cigar Galaxy over here. This is stacked with no darks and no flats. And you can see out in the corners, it really gets dark. So unless you crop this in quite a ways, you're going to have a lot of the artifacts out here on the edges. And even if you crop it in the middle, you're still going to see as you get farther out that it gets darker toward the edges. So a good example, take your dark and your dark flat frames. This is Deep Sky Stacker. This is what you're going to use to stack your lights, darks, flats, all your calibration frames. And we're going to do a demo of this in just a minute, but it's just to show you. This is Deep Sky Stacker. So up here, open picture, this is your light frames, then your 4 calibration frames. Some other settings here, but we'll take a look at this again in a minute. Some Deep Sky Stacker notes. Processing time on Deep Sky Stacker depends on a lot of different things, and some of them are listed here. First of all, it depends on the number of frames, lights, darks, flats. It looks at all of those. So the more that you have, the longer it's going to take. And we could give you a generic feeling about how long it's going to take, but each person's PC is going to be different with the amount of memory you have, the speed of your PC, the number of processors, whether you've got a hard disk drive, solid state drive. And we'll talk about those. Number of stars detected, try and get around 75. We'll talk about the detection threshold in the demo, but try and do around 75. Deep Sky Stacker says it'll work with 8 stars. You want to make sure you've got more than that. Hard disk drive versus solid state drive. Solid state is going to be much faster, but if all you have is a hard disk drive, that's fine. Use what you have. And again, age of PC, amount of memory, speed of CPU, and the number of CPUs that you have. Deep Sky Stacker has a setting to use all of the CPUs on your system to give you a much faster speed. Shut down anything else that's running on your PC before you start running Deep Sky Stacker. That's important. Close down your email, close down your internet browser, close down all the other programs you have. That allows more CPU to Deep Sky Stacker. Re-registering already registered frames. This probably doesn't mean anything right now, but it will in a little bit. But what Deep Sky Stacker does, it goes through all your light frames and basically registers each of those. And what that means is that it goes through your picture, finds all the stars that are in there, and it even tells how much that light frame tilted from the last one. So as you're taking pictures through the night, the stars are going to move, and with that, they're going to change position on your light frame or on the display of your camera. Deep Sky Stacker allows for that. So it knows where your stars are going. It'll find them and it'll track them for you. Turn off your screensaver and your power saving settings. This is always turned on your laptop, your PC, your desktop. And for a good reason, because when you're not using it, you want everything to turn off. What happens though is when Deep Sky Stacker is running, if it runs for 5, 6, 7 hours, your screensaver will come on, or at some point your PC will turn off because it thinks it's not being used. And at that point, Deep Sky Stacker will stop running. And you don't want that. You want it to keep going for as long as it can go. So go into your screensaver, your power saving settings, turn those off until your stacking is done, and then come back and turn it on. And the best thing I've found is that get everything set up whenever you're ready to do it, start it, and then go to bed. Because with some of my stacks, if it runs for 8 hours, 10, 12 hours, you don't want to sit and watch it. So just start it up, go to bed. You can check it in the morning. And that's just like Christmas morning, you're coming down and seeing what it looks like in the morning. I use Adobe Lightroom. I like it. It works really well. You may want to use Photoshop. GIMP is free. People seem to like that. I have Lightroom, so I use that. We'll do a demo of this in just a minute. This is one of my shots. This is 1,300 frames that I stack for a total exposure time of 22 minutes and 22 seconds. And this shows you a little bit of what the result may look like. This is M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy. It's also in the Big Dipper. This is 2,000 frames. Same settings, but for just over an hour's worth of exposure time, you can see a little more detail than the last one. This is the Pinwheel Galaxy, also in the Big Dipper. There's another something down here. Same settings, almost 1,400 frames, 37 minutes total exposure time. So the more frames you have, more exposure time, the more detail you can see in your objects. This is the Sombrero Galaxy. Messier Object 104. We've talked about these two again. This is Bodhi's Galaxy and the Cigar Galaxy. Also in the Big Dipper, or right around the Big Dipper. There's another one over here. Sometimes you'll find that you're photographing a couple of things, and by the time you're done stacking, you'll see other things that just show up in the frame. So it's interesting to try some things and see what you get. One of the biggest, brightest, best targets you'll see in the night sky, and great for this time of year, is the Andromeda Galaxy, M31. Same settings, 2,500 frames, almost an hour and a half of exposure time. When you do that, you can start seeing the detail in these galaxies, the lanes of the gases and the dust in the galaxy, and just so interesting to see. Something else that you may want to try after you do your stacking, you can upload your picture to astrometry.net. And what this does is it allows you to identify other things that might be in your picture. So you upload your picture. Once you get a successful status up here, you can go, it brings up some tabs. The annotated tab will show you other, in this case, they're NGC objects all around, plus the galaxy right in the middle. You can also look at the SDSS. It's the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. This just sort of shows you what you can see if you had $1 billion to play with your equipment. But they put this together and it generically shows you your section of the sky. In ours, we had the galaxy here and this one over here. But given enough exposure time, there are other things that will show up in your picture. Other things that you can stack. You can stack the moon, not using Deep Sky Stacker. These are other things, other software. You can stack the planets. The best ones to stack are Jupiter and Saturn. And the way you do those is to use PIP. PIP is good. What it does is to crop down your photo with just your target in the middle. Run that through Auto Stacker, which stacks them up. Registacks brings out the detail, and then you use Lightroom again. And then you can do, for example, star trails, star stacks, which is free software. That's a nice thing about some of these. PIP is free, AutoStacker is free, Registacks is free, Star Stacks is free. So there's some very good software that's free. Stacking the moon. As I said, PIP, AutoStacker, Registacks, Lightroom. This is the image I started with, and this is the result. So you can bring out the colors, you can bring out the detail of the craters. That's for stacking the moon. You can stack the planets. Planets are a little bit more difficult, but it's the same process. They're very small, they're very far away, but given enough images to stack, you can bring out the detail. You can see the lines in Jupiter. You can see the rings of Saturn. Star trails. I enjoy doing this as well. Star trails depends on how many pictures you take. In this case, it's about 2 hours. So if you like trails that are longer, you need more pictures. In this case, I happen to be out on a night with lots of fireflies. Also makes for an interesting shot. I really like this one and the way it turned out. Settings are different too. Settings are specific to that night. Okay, just about done here with this, and then we'll go into our demos. First one here is a YouTube video done by Forrest Tanaka. Forrest is very good, has a lot of videos on a lot of different subjects. This one is going to be very similar to the one we did tonight. But the thing that he does, he starts with going outside and taking the pictures. So he'll talk about that process, and then he gets into the stacking. Clear Outside, Astrospheric are the two apps that we talked about doing the weather. The moon phases, that was that one. Sky Safari, we did the screen print of where can I find my target in the sky. Stellarium is the PC version of a similar software to find things on your desktop. Thermocell, we talked briefly about, but it's a way to keep the bugs away. Hot pixels, dead pixels, stuck pixels, a little more information here. Calibration frames, more information on that. Deep Sky Stacker is here for the free download. Adobe products are here. Magic Lantern is here. Deep Sky, whoops. Deep Sky Object Identification. Oh, this is astrometry, which we looked at briefly. You can do your upload from this link. And here's some other stacking software that we talked about for doing. Deep sky objects are very different than stacking the moon and the planets. So Deep Sky Stacker does it all for deep sky objects. For the moon, the planets, you'll need PIP, auto stacker, red stacks, and star. These three. Star stacks is for the star trails. And it's time for the demo. We're going to do Stellarium, Deep Sky Stacker, and then we'll look briefly at Lightroom. So that's it for this one. Let's go to Stellarium. When you open Stellarium, this is what you're going to see. Looking south, current view of the sky, current time. Down here is the date and the time. So there's some things you want to do right away. For me, down here, there's a toolbar at the bottom. There's a toolbar on the side. So first of all, right over here, there's a triangle. If you click that, it turns into a square and it stays there. Do the same thing on the bottom one and that stays there. So now you can navigate around, just drag and drop, and your toolbar stay there as well. Next thing is location. Very important to set your location. Pick something from the list or set up your own. Hudson, Wisconsin is not listed in here, so click on the map, find your location, put in your city name, and then you add that to the list. And that'll give you your current location, and it'll show you the way the stars look from that location. The next thing I do, click the clock, and that'll bring up the date and the time. So it shows today. So you can go forward and backward any day that you want, any year that you want. You can also do the time. And that works well because I want to see what it's going to look like later on tonight. So just click this up, and as you do, the sky changes to dark. And there you've got what it's going to look like at 9:36 tonight. Now, there's not too much here that's interesting, so let's add some things here. One thing to do is add, down at the bottom, we can add the constellations. So these are all the constellations. And if you need some help with the names of the constellations, you check the next box. So Capricorn, Aquarius, Sagittarius, all the ones in the southern sky. And if you just drag and drop this, you can move around, see what the sky looks like. You can go up, you can go down. You can scroll out. You can scroll in. Another one that you might want to look at if you're looking for deep sky objects is this one right here. This is the deep sky objects. So you click on that. And some things will show up here. Each of these things is something different. So if you click on one up in the corner, this one is a nebula. The red one over here is a galaxy. So just play with it, look at it. You find something interesting, you can zoom in, and it'll show you what that galaxy looks like. Some really interesting, some really good technology here to check out the sky. Something else that you'll see too is that up here, this is Bode's galaxy, which we've seen pictures of. But as you scroll in, it'll start showing you things that are more and more faint. So the ones that come up automatically are the really bright ones. But as you zoom in, you can see more and more going to Bode's, and as you get in, there's a lot more out here. So for example, the Cigar Galaxy, you click on that, has a magnitude of plus 8.4. so not visible to the naked eye. But you can zoom in and take a look. This one has a magnitude of 10. So you're getting to see some really dim things out here. This is Merak. We looked at earlier in the corner of the Big Dipper. This is the second star that we walked to. And then our deep sky object here is the first one. Here's the second one. So you can look at some of these. Sometimes what you could do is just go out to Deep Sky Stacker. I'm sorry, go out to Stellarium here. This is what the sky looks like tonight. What's in the sky? So we can see Triangulum is there. Andromeda Galaxy is already up. And you can just look at things. You can find things that way as well. Zoom in a little bit if you want to. Find some other things. Here's another galaxy. So, very interesting piece of software. And so
can you point again at where you touched on the screen below to get this display? I didn't catch that.
Okay, to get what display? To get the lines and the names?
Well, right, and those deep sky objects.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, the first one down here in the corner was the lines. Put those back. The next one is for the names. We can click it on, click it off. And then over here, this one is for the galaxies. And we can turn it off, turn it back on.
Okay.
And then for each individual one, you can just click on that and the information will come up in the corner. Now, something that's really interesting, we talked earlier about stars are different colors. If you click on a star, the color of that star is represented in the text over on the side. So, for example, that one is a fairly light star. This one's a little bit darker. And you just get all different colors of stars, which is interesting too, if you're curious about star colors and that kind of thing. But just something else interesting about Stellarium. If you're looking for the Milky Way, it's in the south. If you want to get rid of this, you just click in a blank spot. Oh, I'm sorry. You do the right click and it goes away. If we go into configuration, well, go through some of this too. You can make the things brighter, not as bright. You can go through other things. You can do meteor showers. You can do lots of different things, and there's tutorials on YouTube about it as well. So that's Stellarium. Next one is Deep Sky Stacker. Now I already loaded these, but I'll show you what's happened here. The first one, when you open Deep Sky Stacker, this is what you'll see. And what you do is go up here and you do an open Deep Sky Stacker. You navigate to your light frames and you just select them all and you say open. These are already loaded, so we'll do that. You do your dark frames, same thing. Select all your dark frames, load those, flat, dark flat, offset and bias. And when you do that then, they're listed down here, light, dark, flat, dark, flat, and offset and bias. So it gives you a lot of information about this. We mentioned briefly registering, which we'll talk more about. But once you have a light frame registered, Deep Sky Stacker also gives it a score to tell, in Deep Sky Stacker's opinion, how good is that light frame. So it shows that as well. It shows other information, your ISO, exposure time, a lot of other information. The way that you start this up is, let's go to register checked pictures. So we'll start there. And when you do that, this comes up. First thing you want to do, go to the Advanced tab and compute the number of stars detected. This way you can tell. Oh, let me cancel and go back for a minute. One of the things you need to do in Deep Sky Stacker is choose a reference frame. And usually what I do is take the first one, because that's going to be centered in your frame here. So just do a right click and say use as reference frame. When you do that, it'll put an asterisk here to let you know that this is the reference frame. And once you've got that, then Deep Sky Stacker knows, stack everything essentially over this one so that things are right in the center of the frame. And what we talked about before is that as you go through the night, things are going to start wandering off. It'll bring those back, align it on your center, and then it will align the stars on top of that. So it takes care of all that information for you. Another thing you want to do, potentially, is use a custom rectangle. And what you can do, in this case, is do a 2x custom rectangle. And right in the middle, it has the X. So you can put that in the center of your target. And what Deep Sky Stacker does is that aligns all your other images over the top of this. So it'll find this section of your picture, this section of your light frame, and stack it directly over the top of this one. So that's why I made the comment in the presentation that make sure your custom rectangle doesn't wander off the edge of the screen. Because if it does, Deep Sky Stacker will discard it because it can't line up all the stars. So use a custom rectangle. If you find that your target is really small, use a 3x. So essentially it enlarges it 3 times. So just put that right over the middle. Andromeda is pretty big, so I wouldn't use a 3x on this. But this is the way it looks. And this you can just move around to wherever you want it to be to center over your target. So we're going to go with a 2x custom rectangle. We'll put it right here. And then we'll go with that. So let's do some stacking here. We'll go into here. First thing is the Advanced tab. And you click on Compute the number of detected stars. So we click that, and Deep Sky Stacker will look at your reference frame and find the number of stars it can find. Now the threshold is how bright, how dark are you going to allow your stars to be and still use them for reference. In this case, there's 165. One thing you need to watch is that if you find thousands of stars, that's really going to slow down Deep Sky Stacker, because on each frame, it has to go and find each of those 1,000 stars. So what I try and do is keep the threshold high enough. Let's go about there. And it'll just take a minute, but it looks through each of those and it found 90 stars. Still a little high. Sometimes you'll do this and it'll say that it finds 0 stars. That's not good. It needs to find some stars. So in this case, it found 73. I'm happy with that. If it finds 0 stars, play with your threshold. Go up and down. Move it up and down and try and get the number of stars that you're looking for. Like I say, if it says 0, it's because your threshold isn't set properly, or it could be that your stars are too elongated. And that's what I said before, that if your stars aren't round, Deep Sky Stacker may ignore them and it may say 0 stars found. So once we've got this set, we can go back to our actions. Register already registered pictures. If you've got a lot of light frames and they've already been registered, you don't want to register them again. And in this case, I've already registered these 5 frames. Just for sake of the example, we'll say register them again so you can see what's going on here. Another thing with Deep Sky Stacker, it'll come with a lot of defaults. Use all the defaults. There's a lot of YouTube videos that talk about Deep Sky Stacker. Go through those, play with the settings that you want to, but use the defaults. I mean, it works great. It's a wonderful tool. Something else you might want to try after registering, take the best 80% of the pictures and stack them. If some of your pictures turn out to be garbage, you don't want to use them in your stack. You want them to be ignored. So what Deep Sky Stacker will do is take the top 80% of your scores and it'll stack those. So essentially it looks through everything for you, decides which ones are the best, and uses those to do the stacking. Recommended settings. These are the defaults that Deep Sky Stacker is going to use. Again, take the defaults. If you want to change these, you can just click on them and change them. But initially, going through, use the defaults. It will also tell you that you're using light frames, dark frames, all your calibration frames. Excuse me. And I'm only using 5 for the demonstration here, but it'll show you this is all the things that you're using. And once you're happy with that, you can just say okay. But again, these are all the defaults that it's using. So first time through, use the defaults. If you know what this stuff is, and for a lot of them I don't, you can change it and do something else. So you can say okay there. Stacking parameters. There's a lot of parameters here. Use the defaults. So Deep Sky Stacker knows we create this custom rectangle and it says we're using a custom rectangle. So it'll use that. If I use a custom rectangle, I generally enable the 2x drizzle. And what that does is when you do the 2x, it's throwing away all this other stuff around here. And it's really throwing away a lot of your pixels. What 2x does is automatically increase the number of pixels in this resulting image so that you can enlarge it if you want to. Temporary files, if you're loading a lot of files, if you're running with a lot of light files, Deep Sky Stacker needs a lot of temporary workspace. So you can point this to an external drive. You can use your internal drive, you got space. Just point it to somewhere that you have a lot of space. And by default, it goes to your C drive. The unfortunate part about that is that if it runs out of space, it'll just stop. It doesn't tell you that there isn't enough space. And another good one is use all available processors. If you've got 2 or 4 or 8 or more processors, let Deep Sky Stacker use them all. Light frames, take the default. The only thing that I changed here is RGB. Some of the things you've got will be in color, so you might as well take advantage of it. And you just choose the RGB to allow for the color. Dark, take the defaults. Flat, offset bias, alignment, intermediate, cosmetic. For all these things, take the defaults. For the output, click the create output file. Have it automatically create an autosave.tiff. Create the output file in the folder with the light frames. And when you're ready to go, you just click OK to get out of that. And then you click OK here. OK here. And it'll take you through the entire process. So it says it's registering your 5 pictures. So it goes through each one. Over here you can see it's calculating for each of the, looking for each of the stars. So it's going through each one of those, finding all the stars. Registering is usually what takes the longest part. So if it's already registered, you just want to go with what you already have. But for this, we've got it here. Okay, and then compute and stacking information. So it goes through your lights, your darks, your flats. It goes through everything. And then it does the stacking. It's stacking 2 of 4 because we said 80%. It's only using 4 out of the 5. So it went through all those, then it's computing the final picture. Gives you an estimated time. If you've got a lot of these, it'll tell you your estimated time is 5, 6, 7 hours. And then you know it's time to go to bed. And I see it's 8 o'clock. We're to wrap this up in just a couple minutes. I'll show you Lightroom. It's really quick and we can do that. Some of you may have seen it already. Okay, saving the final image, autosave.tiff. That's the name of your final image. Over here on the side, you can also save your picture to a file. You can do that as well. I'll show you how to do that when this is done. But the one that we'll be using is the autosave. And when it's done, up here at the top, it'll show you some brief information about the picture that was just stacked. Okay, it's loading it up. Okay, so this is our final image. Your final image may not look great, so don't worry about it too much. Andromeda is really bright. There are some tools down here to change your colors and your settings, your brightness, all that. I don't use that. I just go directly to Lightroom. The other thing you can do is over on the left, save your picture to a file. This will come up, give it a file name, save it as a TIFF. And the important part down here is embed adjustments in the saved image, but do not apply them. That works out really well because then in the TIFF, and when it gets to Lightroom, Lightroom can deal with all the layers of the changes or the settings within the picture. And we'll see that in a minute. So you don't want to apply the adjustments here. You want to take care of that in Lightroom. And we're just going to cancel this one. And that's Deep Sky Stacker. Quickly, we'll go to Lightroom, create a virtual copy, go into develop. And in case you haven't seen Lightroom, it's pretty neat what it does. Bring up the exposure a little bit, bring up the contrast, do the highlights. Just play with it, see what you think. Bring the shadows down, bring the whites up. Down the darks, bring up the darks, do some clarity. If you want to, you can do a custom crop. We did the 2x rectangle, you can tilt it if you want to. But basically that's there. You can bring out the colors a little more. Probably too much. But that's Lightroom, and that's all that I have. Terry, do you have questions or?
Well, I don't have any questions. If this is all you have, Bryan, that's quite enough. I really appreciate this. If anybody else has any questions, one thing I wanted to ask, if you could give us, you had that bibliography with all the links to some resources.
Yes.
Is it possible that you could provide that to me in a PDF form so that we can more easily get to that?
Sure.
And where it would be usable, where we could actually click on links.
Yes.
And if anybody has any questions, now would be the time to unmute yourself and ask.
Hey, Bryan, it's Steve. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, Bryan, I think it's going to take me about 3 or 4 times through all this information to absorb all of it. It's a doctoral level right there.
Well, thank you.
The only question I can remember right off the top of my head is you were talking about the timing of mostly the setting moon. When the moon sets, is that a time to start taking pictures, or do you need to wait a little while after that?
If the sky is dark and the moon is down, I usually get started because if you're going to be out for a couple hours, the moon is going to be gone, well down by the time you're done.
Okay.
If there's a problem with Deep Sky Stacker not liking something, it'll deal with that. And in the pictures that I showed, you get a really dark sky anyway with all of what Deep Sky Stacker does for you.
Okay. And then along those same lines, we're out near River Falls, and, you can get a fair amount of light pollution from the cities there. is that mostly I don't know, maybe a function of humidity and cloud cover that causes that? Or do we need to go out even further beyond that to get good dark skies?
I think the best ones are dark sky, dark location. But for all the pictures you've seen here tonight, I did it from my backyard, and I'm 2 blocks from the Hudson High School. So, uh, as long as it looks dark to you, and with the 200 millimeter lens, you're just taking a small area of the sky. So at that point, there isn't a lot of light in that small area of the sky.
Okay. I really appreciate this. It's going to take me 3 or 4 times through it, as I said, to really absorb it. And I'll email you all the rest of the questions, but I really appreciate your expertise here.
Well, thank you. And whatever questions you have, let me know.
All right. We'll catch you later.
And I am recording this. I'm going to stop the recording right now. And the recording will be, let's see, there.